The Glorious Revolution is the first topic under Section A in World History Advanced Level. It is a very simple and cheap topic if only you know the ins and outs of the topic. Now I'm going to give a rundown of the topic. You have the causes of the Glorious Revolution. Under causes, you have religious causes, political causes, economic factors, and social factors. And you have the cause of the revolution, and that is where we talk of the glorious and inglorious aspects of the revolution. Now, you equally have the consequences or the outcome or the results of the glorious revolution. And under it, the major outcome, I'm not saying the only, the major outcome was the drafting or the signing of the Bill of Rights, which set rules on how England was going to be ruled after the dethronement of James II. Now, what was the Glorious Revolution? It was called the Glorious Revolution, the English Revolution, or the Bloodless Revolution, because there was no bloodshed in England. And it was a series of events, and a series of events which provoked the anger of the English people being ruled by James II to rise as one and fight against their monarch James II in order to overthrow him and replace him with his daughter Mary of Orange and the husband William III, or William of Orange. Now, who was James II who provoked the Glorious Revolution? James II came to power in 1685 after the death of Charles II, his brother. Now, it is believed that James II might have comploted, might have brought up a coup in order to eliminate his brother Charles II, and this was done. It is believed. Okay, so English, with all the Test Act that Parliament had signed around 1640 and 41, Catholics were banned from holding posts in government in England. And this was respected under Charles II, who had ruled until before James II came to power in 1685. It should be noted here that Charles II was a Protestant or an Anglican, but he later changed to Catholicism when he demanded assistance from Louis XIV of France, who imposed Roman Catholicism on him before he could be granted assistance, which he accepted. But he was flexible with Parliament. He did not make Roman Catholicism to become the religion of the state. Now, when he died, his brother James II was the next person to take over because Charles II had an illegitimate son. We commonly call him Charles Monmouth, but his real name was James Scott or James Croft, depending on where they spelled the name. So mark it for paper one. Now, when James II, being given that Charles II had an illegitimate child and illegitimate sons could not succeed to their fathers, James II was the next person, but he was a Roman Catholic. But then Parliament said, okay, before you can be granted the throne, you have to swear an oath. This is what we call coronation oath. The oath that James II swore when they coronated him, when they enthroned him in England. He swore an oath that he was going to maintain Anglicanism as a religion of the state, while Roman Catholicism remained his private religion. That was 1685. But when he came to power, he started changing things in England. And in 1687, he started favoring Catholics. which was already against the Test Act which Parliament had passed before he came to power. He issued declarations of indulgence, the first one in February 1687 and the second in April 1687, to favor Catholics and cancel all penal laws against the Catholics. And this was when he started sacking all those who were not loyal to him and all those who were Catholics. All those who were Protestant, because he wanted to give more privileges to Catholics. This process became known as Romanization policies. Romanization comes from Roman Catholic. It means he changed the Anglicans who were in power to put Roman Catholics, thereby changing the institutions to Roman Catholicism. So he dismissed top officials. He dismissed ministers because Anglicans could not be submissive to him. He had to dismiss them and appoint Catholic ministers who would be loyal to him. He even went to the extent of dismissing his two brothers-in-law, who were the heads of schools and universities, and even took Magdalen College of Oxford and placed it under Catholic domination. This annoyed the people of England, who could not take it anymore. And the Declaration of Indulgence that he had signed, he obliged church leaders who were Anglicans to read them in all churches every other Sunday, that is twice per month. And since the Archbishop of Canterbury and 6 other bishops came to him and pleaded that he should withdraw the declaration of the imposition, James too regarded them as opponents and people who could become his enemies. So he had to try the 7 bishops. When they said the trial of bishops, it was the Archbishop of Canterbury and 6 other bishops who were in England. He tried them. Where did he try them? At the court, at the ecclesiastical court, which had been banned by Parliament before he came to power. When he came to power, he renewed ecclesiastical court, and then he started having issues with Parliament and his people. When he tried the bishops, they were tried guilty. But the second time, after dissension, after reshuffling the court, they were tried not guilty. But then James II did not end there. He even went to the extent of Romanizing the army, putting leaders who were Roman Catholics in order for him to be safe, to be secure. But he was bringing problems between him and Parliament. He even went to the extent of dissolving Parliament and building up a new Parliament that would be under him. This was too much for the English people to bear. He equally imposed high taxes on people, which was an economic factor. Why? Because he had maintained a standing army at peacetime, which was against the expectations of Parliament and the English people. No keeping of a standing army in peacetime. But James too went ahead and did that. And this resulted in the imposition of high taxes on the English people. Now, to sum up, why was there a revolution in England? Religiously, James II renewed the ecclesiastical court, which brought problems between him and Parliament and the English people. Secondly, James II Romanized the institutions by appointing Catholic ministers and dismissing those who were not Catholics. 3. James II Romanized the educational system by dismissing his Anglican brothers-in-law and appointing Catholic officials who could be accountable to him. 4. He signed declarations of indulgence to give more privileges to the Catholics. And 5. He broke his coronation oath by making Roman Catholicism become the religion of the state. Okay, politically, he had a strange policy or foreign policy which was not accepted or welcomed by the people of England. Having relations with Louis XIV, his cousin, who was the King of France, brought problems because Louis XIV was a Roman Catholic and could easily influence him and even make him transform England into a Roman Catholic state. So the people feared this and said, "No way, we cannot bear this." That's politically. Politically, again, James II suppressed the rebellion of Monmouth, the Duke of Monmouth, who was Charles II's illegitimate child. What happened? The Duke of Monmouth, Charles II's son, known as James Scott, was 100% sure that he was going to take over the throne after the death of his father. But when his father died, it was instead his brother who came to power. So James Scott said, "No way, this cannot happen. This is the throne of my father and I have to fight for it." So when he came up just immediately after the enthronement of James II to fight and take the throne from James, James ordered his army to behead him. This became known as the brutal suppression of the Monmouth Rebellion. And this angered the people of England, who had a nostalgia, a flashback on what happened under Oliver Cromwell, who was a cruel leader in England. And the people did not want it anymore. Still politically, James II maintained a standing army in the peacetime, and this was not welcomed by the people of England because it still reminded them of the cruel rule of Oliver Cromwell. And they said, "No way, we cannot bear this." Still, okay, now, still politically, but this was not forcefully depending on James II, was the birth of the Prince of Wales. If I ask you the question, what's the name of the Prince of Wales? You all be looking at me. But his name was James Francis Edward Stuart. James Francis Edward Stuart. Since he was from the Stuart family, he bore the name Stuart. Now, why did his birth bring about a revolution? The people of England, when they saw him and the way he was baptized as a Catholic, they said, "No way, we don't want a Catholic successor on this throne. So we have to start fighting for William III, for William of Orange and the wife to come and take over power. Because this child, when he grows up, he'll become a hindrance to the taking over of the throne by Mary. Mary, who was a Protestant and well loved by the people of England and regarded as the heiress to the throne. When the Prince of Wales was born, they saw him as the next successor, and the father was baptized as a Catholic. They said, "No, we cannot accept this." Now, what did they do? They told lies about him. Since James II had killed his late brother's child, James Scott, or the Duke of Monmouth, they also said the Prince of Wales was an illegitimate child. Why? They said he was brought into the palace, he was sneaked into the palace in a warming pan. And so, since they did not know the mother, they just said, "Okay, he's illegitimate, so he cannot succeed to James II." It caused the revolution. But this was the immediate cause of the revolution because the child was born in 1688, 1688, the 10th of August, 1688. So, those were some of the political factors. I didn't say all, but some. And also the James II suspending and dispensing powers. What did he do? Whenever Parliament promulgated a law, James II would suspend it. It will not be applicable. Will dispense it, send it back to Parliament for review. So those powers that he had given himself were also a problem that caused the anger of people of England. And lastly, his belief in the divine rights of kings was another problem that brought about the revolution. The father believed that after God, he was the one, and it was only to God that he could be accountable and not to Parliament. So this was like people could not take it anymore. How can we have a leader who cannot listen to his people and be accountable to them? Why? How? This cannot happen. And since he was an absolute monarch, whereas Charles II was a constitutional monarch, they had to rise and fight. They did not want absolute monarchy in England. Now, talking about economic causes, there was only one major economic cause. I said major, not just one cause, but one major, which was the imposition of high taxation on the people of England. People were paying taxes just because James II had maintained a standing army at peacetime. And you know, when there is peace and there is an army, there is no money to pay. But when there is war and there is an army, there is enough money because people will make what they call the win the war fund. They raise funds in order for the army to win the war, and as such, they have resources to pay the army, to pay the soldiers. But when there is peace, where will the money come from? But James II, being so autocratic, imposed high taxes on the people, and the people said, "But why should we be suffering? The army is not protecting us. This is peacetime." They decided to overthrow him. Now, social factors, there was just one major social factor, which was the role of large landowners in parliament. That is, parliamentarians were given the right to own as large portions of lands as they could. And the people of England who were expropriated of their lands in favor of the people of parliament, they said, no way. How can we? And remember, this parliament we're talking about here was the one that James II built after he had come to power. Okay, so they had the right to seize the lands, whatever they wanted, to seize it and own it, and as large as it could, they owned it. And the people of England could no more take it. And they said, enough is enough. They had to come up as one and demand for his dethronement. And let me say, those were the major causes of the Glorious Revolution. There were really a lot of them, but those were some of the highlights.